Welcome to Week 5 of Library Advocacy Unshushed. First, let's review Week 4. We focused on strategy and communication. Especially, we looked at the essence of the message and of crafting it so that we are going to have resonance with our audiences, those people who are the targets of our communications. We want to connect our issue in some way to their values and priorities so that they can see it in a new way as consistent with something that they value. We identified some common barriers to seeing ourselves as advocates so that we could get them out of the way. We did 2 personal exercises to zero in on our own personal passion for librarianship so that we could speak from the heart, authentically, but never bombastically, and also recalled our experience of our own courage. We saw that we had to communicate 3 things in the framing of our story. What libraries and librarians do that's unique, sometimes called the value proposition, a match between our story and our audience such that it matters to them, and why it's urgent. As you saw in the interview with Nancy Cronick, we need to be clear about what we want them to know, how we want them to feel, and what we want them to do. In the Arch Lustberg video, one that was made many years ago to train librarians, we learned how to deal with a confrontational conversation and ensure that our real story gets out there no matter how the other person frames it. We learned how to think of our audiences in terms of segments so that we can refine our approach to matter to them as individuals in a group that have certain characteristics in common. We know how important it is to break through the noise and the clutter and position our issue with short, clear, appealing communications. How to create that soundbite by putting ourselves in their shoes, and how to make an elevator speech. And our rule of thumb for these short communications is that if the soundbite is all about us, it doesn't work. It has to be all about them. Having looked at the research and that all-important job of framing and tailoring our story for those who are our targets in our advocacy, we now turn to the planning of step-by-step advocacy in practical situations. This session is going to draw on all the past sessions in this course. In video 1, I'm going to go over the prerequisites or preconditions for creating your plan of action to address a specific situation or specific issue. And in videos 2 and 3, we're going to turn our attention to a widely used model for advocacy planning. I want to acknowledge that I first learned this classic 5-step advocacy planning model from Pat Cavell and Ken Haycock, who trained trainers for the Library Advocacy Now program of the Canadian Library Association years ago. That program had been generously provided to CLA by the American Library Association, so it could be customized for Canadian use. And I am proud to say that I am a graduate of both programs. There are versions of these classic steps that you can find in other places as well, which reminds us that it really is a time-tested approach. You can see that it's consistent, for example, with the advice of Fenton Communications to advocates in their document called Now Hear This, which is on your reading list. A couple of points before we begin to look at the planning model itself. The first is that all advocacy situations are unique. I want to say that because it's really tempting to apply a model as if it were like a game of tic-tac-toe and we just have to go through the steps in some mechanical way and turn the crank and the advocacy plan will come out the other end. Nothing could actually be more mistaken. Every advocacy situation is unique in terms of the many factors that are in play at once. The context and the setting and all of the ambiguity of that. There is, for example, a formal chain of authority that is at work in the organizations involved. But there's also the culture, on the other hand, and a whole network of informal relationships. And, of course, culture trumps hierarchy most of the time, doesn't it? There's also the history of the issue and the perceptions that flow from that history. And then there's timing. For example, where you are in a multi-year or multi-month budget cycle. In other words, there's no substitute for knowing your own situation and researching your own environment. When you did the courage exercise about a time when you took a risk on a matter of principle, I trust that you found what others have discovered about themselves as well. That when you have to be, you really are courageous. And that you're able to take risks when you have prepared yourself by investigating the situation, getting all the information you need, and when you have at least some support in your corner so that you're not completely alone. You're going to need that courage because, as an advocate, you may well be swimming against a tide of groupthink, at least initially. Some of your colleagues may be so convinced that nothing can be done, they feel so worn down that they have kind of stopped trying, and they may have taken refuge in anger or passivity. It's going to take courage to assume the leadership risk of presenting another view and another set of possibilities to them. And finally, you may have found in your courage exercise that you were sustained in your risk-taking by a conviction that your issue, the issue that you were taking the risk on, was not just about you, but about something much bigger, something of greater importance. And when that happens, you're able to tap a vein of personal courage. In the next video, we're going to be looking at the prerequisites or preconditions to advocacy planning.